Hi everybody, welcome. I'm Sarah Irving-Stonebraker, and today I'm talking with Craig Hamilton about Christmas and the idea of the incarnation, which we'll get to in a few moments. But first of all, Craig, thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And yeah, start off please by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, for the last 13 years or so, I've been one of the ministers out at a church near Penrith in Glenmore Park Anglican Church. And I am currently on long service leave at the moment, just doing things and learning stuff. I'll tell you one of my latest things that I learned. I learned this yesterday. I bought some mugs, some new mugs, and I was quite pleased with them. But what I realised was, I think a sign of ageing is that you get excited about fresh mugs, because I just think that is ridiculous. You know, what a tragic story.
Yes. Yep.
So that's the latest thing that I've learnt on my long service leave. That's my latest revelation.
Yep. About the nature of ageing. That could be quite profound. Yep. And I've met Nix, your wife, married to Nicole, and you've got, I think, 3 kids.
3 kids, that's right. The eldest, her name's Avalon, and then the middle one is Willow, and the youngest is Ezekiel.
Right, great. So you have written a book about the incarnation, which is we'll get to this in a moment, but the theology, of course, behind Christmas.
Yeah.
But first of all, I'd love to know what Christmas was like in your family growing up. I mean, were you in a family of Christians or?
No, so my family weren't really religious at all. Mum was probably, you'd say, spiritual, you know, like mediums and crystals and kind of new agey. And then Dad was just a regular Aussie bloke, you know, God probably exists, I guess. So we weren't heaps religious. We weren't even very spiritual. Christmas was important for us, but it was important because it was holidays, it was presents, and it was family who would give you presents. That's why it was important, and that's pretty much it.
Yep. So, well, before we get to the sort of theology of Christmas, so you didn't grow up in a Christian family. Can you tell me really quickly how you did become a Christian?
Yeah, well, I always knew that God was real and that he existed, no question. But I hated him. I knew he was real and I thought he was a jerk. And I remember a time I was in my room and like life was not always easy. And I was in my room and I remember I prayed for the first time. I'd never prayed before. I'd seen it on TV and in movies and stuff, seen it on like The Simpsons. So what I did was I knelt down next to my bed, I put my hands together and I prayed. And my prayer was, "Dear God, I'm going to make you regret messing with my life. Amen." And I was in year 6 and I meant it in a year 6 kind of way. And so what I did with that was just then what I did. I just tried to make him regret it. And so if I ever met someone who believed in him or was a Christian, I made fun of them and tried to persuade them out of it. But I was invited to a local church, one of my friends, and I eventually went after lots of inviting and me saying, that's not what I do. I eventually went, and the guy who spoke, he said things that I'd never really heard before, that, you know, God loved people, that he had a plan for them, he wanted the best for them, and I think most importantly, that Jesus hadn't just been crucified, which I never understood it. It just seemed to me his death was a stupid thing that didn't do anything. He was just an idiot who was killed, but that he had been raised back to life again. I'd never heard that before. So those 2 things, the guy explained, I guess, what his crucifixion actually did, and that he had then been risen back to life. Those 2 things were so huge. I then tried to work out whether they were true or not. Found out that the empty tomb is a historical fact. And so that kind of changed everything for me. So I was in my room again. I was kind of the end of year 7 and I prayed again for the 2nd time. And my prayer was something like, "Dear God, I think I have treated you very poorly. Sorry about that. And from now on, I think Jesus really is who he says he is, and I'm going to follow him." And so that's what I did. Just in my room, by myself, at the end of year 7.
Wow. Did that help you? Like, one thing that really struck me about your faith story is that the reason you hated God was that there was real difficulty and suffering in your life. Did becoming a Christian and realising who Jesus was change that?
It didn't change
Or how you felt about it, rather?
It changed how I felt about it, yeah. But suffering and bad things still happened in my life, but it changed the way that I viewed them and saw them and thought about them in a pretty profound way. Part of it has to do with the fact that Jesus was a human on earth, which I think we'll talk more about. That was a big piece of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that he suffered himself.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so you have written a book about the incarnation.
Yeah.
Let's start from the beginning and not assume that people know this theological term. Can you tell us what is the idea of the incarnation? What's it got to do with Christmas?
Simply, it's the fact that in Jesus, God has come into the world as a human, and that Jesus himself was both totally human but also fully God at the same time. And that's it. It's, if you want to ask who is Jesus, you'd say he is God. If you wanted to say what is he, then you would say he is both human and God.
Right.
And that's it. And then all the things that come from that.
Yeah. Okay, so what are some of the things that come from that? Because I think for the most part, I, like you, grew up in a non-believing household. All I understood, and probably a lot of most non-Christians understand about the Christmas story, is a kind of almost like a sentimental picture of a cute little baby, but there is actually so much more beneath that.
Yeah, things are happening. So I think one of the things is, I think, that what it tells us is that God has come into the world to do something for us. So I think of in the Jesus kind of birth story in the book of Matthew, it says that they are to name him Jesus because he will save his people from their sins. So the idea is that he has come into the world to do something. And that's a thing that I don't think I realized when before I became a Christian, that his death does something. I used to always think that it was like, people would say, Jesus, he died to show you that he loved you. And it always just seemed to me like I was, on a wharf eating an ice cream cone, and then Jesus would just run past and be like, I love you, and jump into the water and drown. And you'd just be like, what the heck? Like, at least you could just buy someone a milkshake. You don't have to do that. And I never understood. But the idea is, it's that his crucifixion does something. He's come into the world to save us from our sin. And that is, like all of us, I think, all of us have regrets and we have mistakes that we've made. We know we haven't done the right thing all the time. I don't even live up to my own expectations, let alone God's. So I think everyone kind of has a vague feeling like that. And what Jesus has done for us by coming into the world as God himself is he's paying the price for all those mistakes, regrets, things we've done wrong, the way we haven't lived up to who we're supposed to be. And he's come in to deal with that problem for us. God himself come to save us.
Right. So sin is a problem. Like when you use someone, he could have shown us that he loves us some other way by buying us a milkshake. I think what that gets to is the fact that, sin's a problem and it has to be paid for by death because God is just.
Yeah.
Like, I think when a lot of people, because before I was a Christian, I had the same kind of thought, surely Jesus doesn't have to die. God could just forgive.
Yeah.
But then what I came to realize is, hold on, no, if God is a just God, then all wrongdoing actually has to be punished. Otherwise, you let sin of all magnitudes from, lying to genocide go unpunished. So there's justice. So are you getting at the fact that Jesus pays a necessary toll because God is just?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right. Because, we have this same kind of internal vibe as well. When you see sometimes on news outside of court where, someone's done some terrible crime and the family are out the front and they're crying because justice hasn't been done. And you have this real sense of like, no, that's wrong. Like, people should be punished when they do. Look at that family. There's something wrong with that. It's not right when people do the wrong thing and they just kind of get away with it. So I think we all have that general vibe that that's a good thing. I think the problem is when I'm the person, who needs to be punished for the things I've done. Then I'm like, I think I'd really like God just to forgive stuff. But that's just not how it really works. When bad things happen, when people do bad things, there needs to be justice. And we all agree with that pretty much.
Yep. So this all actually turns back to the figure of Jesus, who, and again, we're in the lead up to Christmas, is born amidst the most sort of in this cultural backwater in Bethlehem and grows up in Nazareth, about which Nathaniel says, can anything good come out of there? Because it's a cultural backwater.
Yeah, it's a hole.
Yeah, it's a hole.
Yeah.
What does that tell us about this God who, as you've just been saying, is just, and yet he comes into the world? He could be any human he likes. Yeah. He could be born into a palace, and yet there's brokenness. And what's with that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most amazing things. Like you say, he could have come in as anyone. He's God himself. He could be a great one. He could live in a great place, but he comes and he becomes a human like us, but not just becomes a human. He becomes a human who lives a real human life. But not just that, he becomes a human who lives a real human life, who suffers like humans do. But then more than that, he doesn't just suffer, he dies. And then he doesn't just die, he's crucified. It's such a unique, I don't think there's anything like it where God himself suffers like that. He doesn't just come into a hermetically sealed cotton wool, low GI, low fat, diet Coke, group hug, high five, marshmallow house, lollipop lane, where everything's always fanfare-tastic. He comes into like our world, my world, the world that I live in, where there's pain and there's suffering and, everything that's beautiful gets ugly. Like if all of us are around for long enough, we all start to become like a melted candle, like we all, and everything that's precious dies. That's the world that we live in. And it's not as though God just like dips his toe into just the edge of it. He comes all the way in, as far into that world as you can get, becomes a human, suffers, dies, experiences that, like our world. And he does it not because he has to, but he does it for us. I think that's amazing.
Yeah. Stunning. What do you think that tells us about who God is and who we are?
Yeah, I think it shows us, it shows us, number one, that salvation comes from him to us. It's not that we need to be something or be good enough or be religious enough or be nice enough or try. It's not about us getting ourselves to him or being good enough to be worthy of him, nothing like that. It's that he comes to us to fix this problem that we've created but that we can't solve. So it tells us, number one, that's how salvation works, from him to us, not us trying to get ourselves to him, which again I think is at least relatively unique, maybe totally, that it's not about us being religious or doing stuff or being the right thing or saying the right prayers or going to the right places or any of that, but that it's what he's done for us. I think that. But then I think, secondly, it shows us the kind of God he is a God of humility, and service and sacrifice. As in, not that we need to do something for him, but that he does something for us, he sacrifices for us. Because, like again, the way he solves this problem is at great cost to himself as he becomes a human, lives a human life, suffers, dies. That's a great cost. And he does that not because he has to, or because we've earned it, or deserved it somehow, but because we haven't.
Yeah. And that's a really nice way of actually bringing us back to the idea of the significance of Christmas in this broader story, because actually what you're doing here is telling us a broader story about the fact that, well, when God is born as Jesus, in the person of Jesus, and remains, as you say, of course, fully God and yet becoming fully human. Actually, that's like chapter 7 in a much bigger story in which, well, he's coming into the world because, like, to show us and to die for us, to do this for us because, well, there's a need and we've rejected him in the first place.
Yeah, that's right.
And so the big story.
Yeah, it's the climax of a much bigger story. Yeah, and it's the solution to a much bigger problem. Yeah.
I think that's a really poignant thing to be reminded of because, you know, as we are recording this conversation, we're in the lead up to Christmas. And it's interesting that, you know, regardless of whether you are a believer or a non-believer, Christmas seems to be this time of year when all the internal dynamics of people's inner life and family life seem to be brought to the surface. You know, whether it's, and for some people, you're very joyous, but for a lot of people, it's fraught with tension and brokenness and people who should be there but aren't there. And yet what you're saying is, hold on, actually, forget about the sentimental saccharine Christmas cards. The real story of Jesus is actually a person who knows that suffering, who's described as a man of sorrows. Yeah. So actually, there should be comfort and more than comfort. It's like there's good news in the Christmas story for people who actually find it such a difficult time of year.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because it is such a hard time. Even though, you know, there's the Christmas spirit and we're all happy, it's still, you still have to, you know, it's stressful. You're already stressed and now everyone wants to hang out with you before Christmas and your calendar's full and you've got to get to the shops and buy presents with money you don't have for people you don't like. And it's a hard time, even if you're a Christmas spirit, you know, put the tinsel up in October kind of person.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also, you know, like you, having been for a significant proportion of my life and young adult life a non-Christian, I was really aware that even if you sort of get into the Christmas spirit and enjoy it, and there are good, happy things and joyous things, there's this kind of emptiness afterwards when it's like, and what's the deeper meaning of all that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there is something hollow about it.
Yeah. But Christmas, okay, so now, like, you've become a Christian since a teenager. What's the significance of Christmas now to you and to your family as people who follow Jesus and believe in this much bigger story about the fact that, well, when Jesus becomes fully human in the person of that tiny baby who grows up and dies, how has that changed?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things is, yes, like baby Jesus grows up to be Jesus who is crucified for us. That's a big deal. But I think there are three things that just come straight into my mind. The first one is the fact that Jesus is God made man means that, you know, if Jesus was just a human, just a great human teacher, amazing man, what a guy, if he's just a human, then his crucifixion for us is, number one, it's unjust. Because, like, let's say you're at my house and you smash all of my mugs, my fresh
Your new
mugs.
that you're so excited about. Yeah.
You maniac. Maybe you do it because you're unco or because you're like a malicious maniac, but you smash them, right? Then either I can say, hey man, you need to buy me new mugs. And that would be totally fine, that's fair. Or I can say, forget about it, I know what it's like to smash mugs, I'll pay for them and I'll buy new ones. Either way, that's fine, right? Either you pay for them or I pay for them, someone's gonna pay for them. Either I pay for them in terms of I buy new ones or I live a mugless life. But either way. But what I can't do is I can't just find some rando who's walking past and be like, hey, she needs to buy me new mugs. That's not fair. That's totally unjust. The issue is between you and me. And so if Jesus is not God, then if he then dies in my place, that's totally unfair. It's got nothing to do with him. It's between me and God. But if Jesus is God himself, then it's totally okay for him to pay the price instead of me. So it makes the whole thing, it makes it just. But also, if he's not God, it means that his death for us is insufficient. Because again, right, like the value of a human is so high. How could you ever be able to say how valuable a human is? They're so valuable. Again, if someone was to come in here and imagine they just like captured you and like put a bag over your head and took you away and kidnapped you, and then they called me up and were like, we have Sarah and we'll give her to you for like $10. Then if I was like, $10, I'll have to think, can I call you back? Like, obviously no, because you're so valuable as a human. And so to pay the price for you, if it's just one human paying for another human, then maybe we could do a one-for-one swap. Jesus is perfect human, he swaps in for you, but then what about me and the rest of us? We got nothing. But if Jesus is God himself, infinitely valuable, then he can pay the price for as many people as want to come. You know what I mean? So his death is now sufficient. If he's just a human, it's not enough. And then the third thing, besides it being unjust and insufficient, the third thing I think about God becoming human is that he knows what it's like to live our life and to suffer like we do. He's not unaware. Even though he's infinite, he knows everything, but he's experienced it as a human. He knows what it's like to have your family not understand you, or to have your friends leave you, or to have your friends betray you, or to be afraid, or to need courage, or have people spread rumors about you, or he knows what all of that feels like as a human. And so you have a God who is empathetic to our plight as humans. Yeah. So I think those three things they're what come to mind when I think of why the incarnation is so special. Yep. And why Christmas is so special.
Yeah. And I think when you read the stories about Jesus' life in the Gospels, one thing that's so clear is the way that Jesus comes, he says, to the people who realise they're sick and they need a doctor. In other words, they need a saviour. But even as a historian, reading those stories makes me realise how completely unique it is for God to become a human, because in no other ancient text or culture is the idea that God himself would be on the margins with the despised, the rejected, the sick, the lepers, like the woman caught in sexual sin. And yet here is God who, in the person of Jesus, is with those people. Yeah. And so I think when we think about Christmas, and when I think about a lot of friends who are non-Christians who find Christmas difficult, or perhaps who look from the outside in at Christians' Christmas and think, it must all just be like Saka and happy. No. Actually, I just love talking about and telling them, no, actually, this is the time of year when we celebrate and realise that actually in that darkness, in that brokenness, God has become fully human, and he's with those people. So if you're broken and if you're sick and if you think, no, I need God, actually he's for you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's like you can't be too far away from him. If you were to think that either he's not interested in me, I'm too small, or I'm too insignificant, or maybe I've done too many bad things, and who could possibly forgive me or want me or anything like that. It's like, that's just not how it is. Because, yeah, like you say, you can see in Jesus' life, like when you see Jesus, you see God. And he spent time with people who were marginalized, excluded, the dregs, the unforgivables. That's who he spent time with. And he came all the way in. Like you can't be so far away that he wouldn't come for you, because he came all the way in for people like us.
Yeah. And I think also, again, for people who, and this was me before I was a Christian, who have this kind of skeptical sense, oh, well, it can't be true. Actually, the fact that Jesus is on the margins with those people is actually a very powerful force of evidence that we can trust these stories written down about Jesus, because this is so at odds with anything that ancient cultures expect of a God that you don't make that kind of stuff up. Like if you're trying to make up a God to persuade people that this is the Saviour, this is God, you don't make up anything that looks like that, right?
Right.
So exactly. It's believable. Like this is something that the Bible story about Jesus can be trusted.
Yeah, that's right.
For many reasons, but that's one of them.
Yeah. That's right.
I would love to just conclude by asking one of my favourite questions of you, which is, what do you find at heart so compelling about Jesus?
Yeah, I mean, so many things far out. I think probably the big one is that he is the kind of person, the kind of God who comes into a human world like ours. I think the incarnation for me is so stunningly spectacular that he has done something like this, like you say, in history, concrete, tangible. It's not a philosophy. It's like a historical event that actually happened. He came into our world, tangibly, concretely, humanly, and knows what it's like from the inside, you know? And so I just think that is just stunningly amazing, that he comes in, not because he has to, not because he needs to, but because he wants to, you know, to save us, to solve a problem that he didn't create, you know, for us. I just think that is just an amazing truth, that I don't need to be anything or become something to be good enough, you know, worthy enough, that it's free.
Yep. Craig, thank you so much for talking to me. So we have a number of Christmas services at Pitt Town Church. They will probably, due to COVID, be online, but for more information, please head to our website at pitttownchurch.com. And perhaps some of the things that Craig and I have been talking about are raising questions for you. Perhaps you'd like to find out more about the claims of Jesus, about the Bible, about Christianity. I'd love to invite you to a course called Introducing Jesus, and it's a very low-key way of finding out more about all of this and being welcome to ask any questions that you like. For more information about that, head to our website at pitttownchurch.com.